the impact this year. One of them, of course, is DeAndre Hopkins moving to the Cardinals. He's second among all wide receivers in fantasy points over the last 5 years, behind only Julio Jones. Jones, of course, now has a new teammate, and that's Todd Gurley, who was headed to Atlanta from L.A. He was the number one fantasy running back in 15, 16, and 17, or I should say the number one running backs from those years all moved this offseason. He did, along with David Johnson and Devonta Freeman. And then, of course, with Tom Brady moving to Tampa, Brady is ranked outside the top 10 in fantasy points each of the last 2 years, but it'll have an impact on his receivers, who've been a very big piece of this. So we were thinking, there's a big part of this that's fantasy. That feels very normal. Let's have a conversation about that with our friend Field Yates. And Field, it's great to see you. And I want to start there with Brady going to Tampa. Less about him, but how about the impact that he has on a pair of receivers who, with Jameis Winston, put up enormous numbers?
Yeah, Greeny, believe it or not, there really isn't an impact. And I mean that in a very kind way about both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, because you take away the games they were injured last year late in the season, and Godwin was the number 2 scoring wide receiver on a points per game basis in fantasy, while Mike Evans was number 5 on a points per game basis in fantasy. Both of these guys are factors in the red zone, and although the team might be a little bit less pass happy because Tom Brady won't be putting them in multi-score holes like Jameis Winston did with all those interceptions last year, the ability of these players, plus the propensity to throw it deep under Bruce Arians, sets them up for another monster year and puts Brady actually back in that top 10 quarterback range, which, as you just alluded to, has not really been his home of late.
All right, and then let's talk about some of the other new guys who've moved from one place to another and what that impact will be.
Yeah, let's begin in Miami, where, believe it or not, last year, Greeny, Ryan Fitzpatrick led the Dolphins in rushing. Now they add Jordan Howard, who's a solid player. He's got 2 1,000-yard seasons in his career already, and things could change in the draft. But as things are right now, he's the clear-cut workhorse in that Dolphins backfield and could be on pace for another 1,000-yard season. And speaking of a guy that's sort of back from the dead in fantasy football, David Johnson, in 2016, he scored 20 touchdowns. He had 80 catches. He had over 1,000 rushing yards. Last year, he had less than 100 carries as he got benched for Kenyon Drake. He's in Houston and has a major impact on that offense, as he should be not just a focal point in the running game, but also a receiver as well. Now, as much as it pains me to say this, his quarterback, Deshaun Watson, actually has a little bit of a stock down feel to him right now. Now, I still love Deshaun Watson. We all do. And he's still going to be one of the 5 or 8 top drafted quarterbacks. But last year, he was number 2 amongst quarterbacks in terms of fantasy points per game. And when you lose DeAndre Hopkins, Greeny, it doesn't matter who you are. Somebody is going to have to take a little bit of a hit with Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson and others. Deshaun Watson closer to quarterback 5 this year than quarterback number 2.
You know what? That is exactly what we wanted. We thought we have no idea when fantasy drafts are going to take place, but it would feel very normal to hear Field Yates breaking some of this down. It was a pleasure to do it. Have a great weekend, Field. Thank you very much for jumping in. Meanwhile, due to the spread of the coronavirus in the U.S., some Power 5 conferences canceled all spring sports, which includes college football. Our Kirk Herbstreit was on ESPN Radio last night with some thoughts about how there may not be any football anytime soon.
I'll be shocked, honestly. I haven't talked with anybody. I'll be shocked if we have NFL football this fall, if we have college football. I'll be so surprised if that happens. Just because from everything I understand, people that I listen to, you're 12 to 18 months away from a vaccine. Until you have a vaccine, I don't know how you can let these guys go into locker rooms and let stadiums be filled up and how you can play ball. I just don't know how you can do it with the optics of it. If I'm a commissioner, I'm in charge. If I'm the NCAA, I just don't know how you can do that. Next thing you know, you got a locker room full of guys that are sick, and that's on your watch. I wouldn't want to have that. As much as I hate to say it, I think we're scratching the surface of where this thing's going to go. I don't know if people realize what it takes to get ready for an NFL season, to what it takes to get ready for a college football season. I mean, you don't all of a sudden come up with something in, I don't know, July or August and say, okay, we're good to go. And turn them loose.
If you can't start training your football team by July 1, you're going to need at least 4 weeks. Strength and conditioning coaches are going to want 6. Sports medicine is probably looking at 4 to 6 weeks. I think the realistic goal here is minimum of 4 weeks of conditioning before you put them in camp. College football is going to be affected if we're not playing in 90 days in terms of the conditioning element in getting these young men ready.
So that was Herbie and then Brian Kelly, of course, who was on with Scott Van Pelt the other night, talking about a date by which he feels they need to be back on the field. And, Bobby, I want to start with you because you're so close to this there at Ohio State. What are you hearing from the people inside of the program as far as what they think they need in order to get the kids back on the field?
Well, I think they need some sort of modification in the summer because typically there's no contact between the position coaches, the head coach, and the players. So the conditioning is one piece of it. They're going to have to find a way to make up for spring ball. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have some sort of hybrid with OTAs where they can get guys involved. But let's make no mistake about it. If there's no class at schools, then there's going to be no football because there won't be anybody in school to play. The second big piece of this, in college sports, football at the majority of schools funds everything else year-round. A lot of the big-time programs like the Ohio States, the Bamas, the Michigans, they're bringing in over $100 million. That funds their winter and spring sports. If they do not have football in the fall, you're losing the gate, you're losing TV contracts. But even if you just cut the gate, that's half. That is going to be a huge void that they're going to have to find a way to make up. And these aren't rich NFL owners. They are nonprofit institutions, and that's going to be a serious, serious issue.
It's a point I'd like you to expand on here because we could talk about the NFL potentially playing in empty stadiums because so much of the NFL's money comes from television. But in college, they really do depend on those ticket sales, right? That's an incredibly important piece of the puzzle economically.
You look at some of these huge stadiums, they seat 100,000 people. And so when you start doing the math on that, $60, $70, $80 a ticket, you average it out, they may be bringing on their TV deals. They could potentially be bringing in $50 million, but they might bring in $70 to $80 million with their gate, with the concession, with the traffic. And so that's a huge piece of this. And like I said, that money, it doesn't support football solely. It supports everything else. So if you cancel fall sports, there's a good chance that you might not be having a lot of winter sports or spring sports as well.
What do you think, Booger?
I completely agree with Bobby. And from a football perspective, we always talk about the quality of football, the quality of the product. Understand this. If guys don't get an opportunity to practice, get the chemistry, get the timing, think about all the schools that are breaking in new head coaches, new offensive coordinators, new defensive coordinators. With no spring practice, no summer training, you're going to be behind, and you got to realize you don't want to put the kids at a disadvantage because although we want them to train on their own, how many guys can actually train and get ready for football while quarantined at their house? So I agree with Bobby. There are a lot of effects both on and off the field.
All right, we'll wait and see. And obviously, I think Scott Van Pelt has been saying it right at night. It costs us no more to be optimistic than it does to be pessimistic. Obviously, sitting here, I have no control over when these things will or won't come back. We can all just sort of hope for the best. I hope that we do have football this fall, pro and college. And if that's Pollyannish, then we'll just have to wait and see. Guys, thank you very much. We'll come back to you for more in a moment. There's something else I think we need to talk about today. When I was a kid, there was absolutely nothing in sports that was more fun than going to see the Harlem Globetrotters. And the man that you see on your screen, Fred Curly Neal, was maybe the single most important reason. The legendary Globetrotter died in Houston yesterday. He was 77. No details have been released yet on the cause of death. But I can tell you that before the internet and cable television really existed, Curly Neal and the Globetrotters introduced the sport of basketball to millions of fans across the globe. And we could just let this video play, as far as I'm concerned, for the remainder of the morning, and I would never get tired of watching it. His shooting, his ball handling skills, his smile, his iconic bald head, all those things made him a legend. And I'll just say this briefly, that when I was a kid, basketball wasn't nearly as popular as it is now. So the stars in the world of the NBA were nowhere near as famous as they are today. Guys like Curly Neal and Meadowlark Lemon were absolutely as famous as the players who played on NBA teams. And so I can finish it by saying this. Curly Neal probably made as many people smile as any athlete that ever lived. And I cannot imagine having a better epitaph